thank you to wait the end of the day for the last round of tracks. So we are here today to talk about how to build a theming system with React. Actually, most of what I will say apply to most of modern front-end frameworks, so it's a more broad topic. But we will use React as medium for the code example and explanation. So first of all, I'm Matteo Ronchi. I work at WorkWave, an US-based company that works in fleet management and GPS tracking. And I'm also a community leader of Fever, the community of Verona on front-end development. I see some familiar face, so woo, thanks to be here. And before starting, making a theme system requires a deep knowledge of how your application is built and how every component and every part is styled. So to give you a better understanding of what we made at WorkWave and why, I will start with a little introduction on the whole world of today modern development. So in latest years, most of all, or every framework on front end is using component as a starting point for their architecture. So Angular 1 at some level, Angular 2, React, Vue 2, and all the other one are component-centric. This is very important because component allow us to think in smaller pieces. Building blocks is more similar to Lego or bricks or anyway very encapsulated reusable elements. Then we can reuse without touching them or touching them not that much after we define their functionalities. And this is very important because enable us as companies or developer to have product that can scale. We can compose component, and the composite component can be composed again and again and again until we get the whole application. So we don't think anymore about pages, views, but just about component. This is a mind shift, not that easy for people doing web development since long ago. But it's very helpful and help us to learn and start using new approaches and benefit from new possibilities. One of those possibilities are higher order components. I don't know if any or most of you know a little of functional programming. In functional programming, there's a concept called higher order function, and is basically the concept that you create a function that take a function and give you back an augmented function. So you add functionalities or change behavior of an input function, creating a new one that you can use and still compose or re-augment. And higher order components are the same, but working with UI elements. So we don't have just a button. We have a button, then we have a layer that add interaction to the button, a layer that add, I don't know, mobile awareness to the button, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that approach allow us to create a sort of composable layers that we wrap around our pure implementation of UI element. So we can split the basic bricks and the composite final brick we need for a specific purpose. And this is something that once you start doing it, get every time easier, and it became a recurring pattern because you start creating firstly your augmentation layer. They are generic and aware of a single activity. And then you put those layers over your UI component like an onion, and you create variation of these onions. And it's a different way of thinking of UI, but when you scale, when you need not small prototype, but application made of thousands of UI elements and hundreds of views, it became crucial to achieve maintainability and don't get crazy while adding new stuff or refactoring old one. But this introduction was to move over styling. So now we understand a little better what we use as building blocks, component. But how can we style those components? There are many ways to do it. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. There are just many. And which one is right depends on the project, on your skills, on your expertise, on your background, on your deadline, on timely matter. And so the first option you get is the plain CNS. A simple expression, everybody doing front-end should know CSS. And CSS are instructions that we write statically and provide to an HTML page to instruct the page on how element will be rendered. This is very easy, not that easy, but it's easy to comprehend and start doing it, but it's static and it scales not that well when your application starts growing, really. Then we have CSS module. They are a little fancier, they are newer, and they are one of my personal favorite options. CSS modules are plain CSS, but scoped. So you isolate your CSS per component. So you don't get naming collision. You can reuse simple names, for your CSS classes, not anymore long name spacing or BAM-like syntax. If someone of you knows or use BAM, I'm sorry for you. But anyway, one of the worst aspects of CSS module is that they are very redundant. So being encapsulated and isolated, at the end you get a lot of replication of identical CSS classes with different names, because every component is a word in itself, like web components and Shadow DOM, for example. Then there are inline style. I don't want to talk if they are good or bad, right or wrong. They are another option, and is probably the faster option if you need fast and dynamic changes on your styling. Because being pure JavaScript, you just change a value of a variable, and your UI reflects that change. This approach is a little not ideal if you need optimal animation performances, because you have to make the browser do a lot of extra work to elaborate and compute all the styles. But for the average web application with few transitions, there is really no difference on today's computer and mobile phones. And in the end, we have the Magnum, so runtime generated CSS. And we have a lot of new kids on the block today. This trend started early in 2016, and it's a fusion of CSS module approach and inline style, but runtime generated. So you don't write CSS in a statical manner. You write dynamic rules that output final CSS that will be injected into the browser at runtime on demand. So your application, if it's not server-side rendered, start with 0 style or very few style. And then you start injecting those style in the page. And if you don't have big needs of fast animation at the start of your application on particular scenarios, the user doesn't recognize the fact that the CSS it's being created a few milliseconds later, the page starts loading. You really doesn't notice. And that brings us to theming. We have seen the component, we have seen how to style them, but we need to make a step further. We need to aggregate styling, make the styling somehow coherent and consistent to be describable and easily transportable between application or application module at least. In UI development, we, thinking and speaking about theming, we create building blocks of colors, formatting, spacing rules, and we put a label, a name on those configuration. And then we apply those labels to our UI elements. We can apply those labels in very different ways. Again, there isn't a single way to do anything in the front-end world, and often the biggest challenge is to choose the right way for your project and your team, because both matter a lot. And so when we think about all of these, we need to start aggregating ideas. The first step is to aggregate, and the easier one, our color, our basic rules, our font sizes, our padding, and those normally are called color palettes. Color is not, maybe is a little specific, so they are palettes. But the color was nice with the background, so I choose that. And this is a very simplistic example of a color palette. So we define, this is less, some variable, and we reuse those variables in our class definition. If we need to change some value, we just change the variable, and the whole application will update. The biggest limitation of this approach is that it's not dynamic, it's statical. So you choose your style, you define your style, and you bring those style to the user. You can change it. This works well in early phases of development and in smaller product, but in very dynamic product or big application, doesn't scale very well. Then we have props-driven styles approach. This is a term I invented. It is not something global, but it was to point out all the approaches that use dynamic information provided to our components to define and create the style we need in that specific particular moment. And the benefit using runtime generated CSS is that after we create the first time a specific set of rules, we don't have to recreate it. We just have it ready in the browser. We can just reuse it. But another thing I'll tell you later. Okay, this is an example using styled component. Styled component are a very nice library, probably the the best made and the most followed as today in the React community, and is made by very clever developer, and enable you to use traditional CSS. I'm sorry for the contrast on the red. Inside your component. So this is not, this is wrong. This is my error. You should write background dash color. So this is an error of me writing the slide. So you write real CSS, not JSON syntax. And you can use dynamic JavaScript codes to choose which part of your theme, of your palette, will be applied. So in this example, the background and the font will change based on a a flag is footer passed to the component. I don't think it is making sense in a real component. It's just to point out that given a variable or a value of a variable, we can choose which style pick from our theme and use in that moment. But this is dynamic. Every time the props changes, our component to recompile, and if something is changed, the CSS will be recreated, creating a new CSS class. And this is, all of that is done behind the scene, so you don't have to do nothing. Just write your rule and your condition. And the library will take care of all the rest of the work, the hard work. Also, styled components are very interesting because are the only one of those new categories of libraries for theming and styling that support React Native. So you don't have to worry on differences and nuances between native platform and web. You just use CSS, and the library will apply as supposed to be the rules to the environment you are working on. So palette and prop-driven development and all the other approach are very cool. We use it, I use it every day. But for our product at WorkWave, it wasn't enough. We needed something more broader, something that took care not just of the building block, but also of the greater scope of the whole application. Because those approach, the styled component, for example, is really cool. Enable us to create styled UI in matter of minutes, not hours or days. But it became, on my personal opinion, a mess when you start having dozens, or hundreds of components aggregated together. Okay, in React you should never aggregate hundreds of components together, but dozens sometimes happen. Maybe 10, 12, the bigger part of your UI, the outer component are very big sometimes. And having a lot of styling, because this is an example, but normally a simple style definition for a button with hover, pseudo-selector, and maybe a focus, and other one, and media queries get very long, very fast, and you get hundreds of lines of CSS inside your component. So I really love that React put HTML and JavaScript on the same context. But having the styling rules on the same context, on the same file, for me, is a little cumbersome. It really grew unmanageable and unmaintainable very fast. So we searched for something different. I have also to point out that styled component, when we made our solution, were just born. So it was not a viable solution for us. It was too new, too unpredictable to be used in a real product. And we had also, say, different need. So our product need to change the whole theme at runtime dynamically based on user input. So like what you see, what you get product. So the user is not able to tweak the single element, but can change the whole style. And also sometimes we need to change that style based on the user privileges or area is accessing. Also, we needed to decouple because of the verbosity of the styling concern and the component. That is very important to me also because it makes really reusable the component. If you put too much styling inside not a base component, not a single button, but an aggregated component, maybe the header, you can't reuse it because the style are coupled to that specific application. If you decouple the two parts, you get, not always, but often, are reusable, and often inside your company. Supposedly, your company should sell coherent visual styles, and so all the product share layout and semantics. Or if you are an agency, anyway, you normally tend to sell your style to your customer. And so we needed to remove the styling from inside the component. And that brings us back to traditional CSS, because what we want is, okay, I know that the button needs two CSS classes, background and foreground, for example. And you just know how to use that classes. It doesn't care what the classes do or how. It just expects background and foreground to exist. And that's it. We also needed per component variation. So we have scenario where a dialog pop out, and we need that all the content of the dialog will be styled with a different theme, but just the dialog, living inside the main application with the main theme. And also, last but not least, we want to support both component-based and atomic CSS approach. I don't know if, how many of you know how atomic CSS works? Okay, just one. Cool, man. Anyway, atomic CSS is a different approach where instead of thinking of the component, let me rephrase. It's like working with component. You don't think about the bigger picture. You create the smallest rule possible. That means one rule is one color. So I have the class blue, the class red, the class black, etc., etc. I have the small font, medium font, and the only rule inside the CSS class is the font size. So I get really hundreds of single rule or double rule CSS. And then I compose those classes together to get the result I want. So it's a different shift. The worst aspect doing that with traditional CSS is that you get class attributes long like 200 characters, because you have the blue, the padding, the font, and as many classes as you can think of. And this is ugly. But it works. We want to do to achieve the same in our dynamic generation, but we don't want to support just that. What I mean is that our theme, speaking of theme and expertise, is very JavaScript skilled, but not very skilled on CSS and styling. So we can't benefit from real designer with CSS experience. So we needed to be able to start with component-based approach. That is the easier one. You create the button class, the label class, the header class, and etc., etc. But later, we want to change that without affecting the UI, but just the theme, migrating from component approach to atomic CSS approach. That in the future, in the long run, should allow us to reuse the theme and a lot of the rule we created. So we get our theme manager. The theme manager is just called theme manager. It's not at the moment a public project. We intend to open source it, but we didn't have the time since now we are in a tight deadline for delivery a product. But the theme manager we developed and we are working on is based on a simple concept. The theme manager owns themes from one to any. And every theme is just a big map, a JSON file, if you prefer, of styling rules. And the only thing you can do to a theme manager object, aside from adding new theme, is subscribing to the active theme and be notified when something, if ever, will change. The change happens normally just in what you see, what you get application, where the user can customize the product. But for our needs, it happens also when you need to change the visual style, because you need to switch the user from admin role to limited role, and you want to dynamically change the whole UI, but we don't want to load the whole theme for both users from the start. We load just your right theme for when you log. When you switch role, we load the new theme. And this is important because we have very many roles, and we don't want to load hundreds of kilobytes of theme that we would never use. A theme object is a simple map with some API and contains two big collections. The styles, that is the real theme. So the style is a map of categories. Every category is an aggregated of what you could think of like CSS classes. So I have the category button or header, and inside it I have the CSS classic background, main button, confirm button, I don't know, overlay, disable overlay, and whatever you need to. And then we have preset. Preset are overrides that we programmatically can apply to the theme. So I have, let's see, I hope it's too small for you. Let me see if I can zoom a little. So this is the theme, and it's just a very stupid and not useful button. So I have the button category, and the category contains just a single class, button. For that purpose, the double nested level is redundant. But normally we have 2, 3, 5 or many subclasses of button. So in that case, it's worth the effort. And we define our rules. Those rules could work as inline style. So I could take the object and put it in a style attribute, and it works. But I can also translate it to real CSS using style component, Aphrodite, Styletron, and all the libraries that do that job. Then we have, in this example, a single preset called dark, that, as you could imagine, is a darker version of the button that override some of the property. So the presets are merged over using object assign. So it's a shallow merging of every single class of every single category. And so we can override whatever we need. And being that those files are JSON loaded from the server, is very efficient. We can use the tool we want to create those files. Other languages, server-side tool, desktop application, we don't care. And it's very easy to tweak. And in the end, we just pass at least one theme to the theme manager. This is the same example with slightly different values, but using atomic CSS. So instead of button, we have colors and backgrounds. And colors use semantic description. So we have normal color, confirm color. Normal background, confirm background. And the preset override all of those values with new one. We will see in a moment what we can do with those values. Okay, so a themed component is how we call our enhanced component that access the style. Just expect a single prop that is a map, an hash, of class names. Nothing else. To make it work, because the part supporting the theme is pure JavaScript, can be making work with Angular, Vue.js, Cycle, whatever you want. We made for now just the binding for React, but it's not that big deal creating other one. And our binding, very similar to Redux, for who of you know it. We have a provider and a connector. So we have theme provider, that is a component that we put on the root of our application, that we receive a theme manager instance, and will share to every descendant using React context that theme manager. We support also theme manager passed as prop to theme-aware component, but it is not the preferred option. Then we have connect theme. Connect theme is, like in Redux, the connector. Is an higher order component, we talked before, that knows about the theme and the theme provider, and know how to access the theme provider, and how to interact, subscribe to it. We instruct the connect theme, telling him what information, which part of the theme we want. So for this example, we just want the category header. We can ask from 1 to as many as we need categories. And what the connect higher order component will do is to take only those fields and pass only those subset of the theme to our map theme to prop function. The map theme to prop function is our transformer method, is the place where we get the style, the theme, and the component props, and we choose what will be passed as style to the wrapped component. So this is the example from these. This is an higher component accepting header, and header is a category that contains 2 CSS classes, wrapper and label. And we pass down those properties without doing nothing. This is not required. Our manager, if you don't provide a map theme to prop, will automatically take all the classes of all the categories you asked, and will do that for you without having the hassle to do it manually. But more often than not, you need to interpolate, mutate those data. And then, by default, we inject a prop called CSS. It's configurable, so if you want to call it my awesome styles, you can do it. And we just use those name. The real name probably of the CSS class will be something like a SHA, auto-generated string, plus wrapper and the component name. Every library that create runtime CSS have a slightly different approach, but most of them use the JSON version of your style to generate the SHA. So if you pass more time the same information, you get the memoized value from the library. Okay. So as I said, map theme to props is where we control what we want to do. This is an example of map theme to props without using the props. So it's static styling. That style will be recomputed only if my theme will change. Otherwise, will be computed just once for the first instance of those kind of components that will be rendered, because we memorize the value of the generated style and avoid to recompute unnecessary classes. So if you don't know the 3 dot is called spread operator, is not standard JavaScript as today, is a proposal, and basically take all the properties of the normal object and explode those properties in the object we are creating as a literal. So wrapper will be a new object containing all the properties that normal is containing. And normal button will contain all the properties from normal, for colors normal and background normals. So we compose. This is using atomic CSS approach and is where, in my opinion, that approach really shine. Using a component base, it is less clean, but do the job anyway. And then we get the same CSS properties with our classes. This is the same example, adding some prop. So we have a can confirm prop that allow us to disable the confirm button based on whatever our architecture is based on. And what we do is choose if apply or not the disable style. Also, this, the second, the confirm disable, there's an error because it should be disable.confirm. This is an error of me writing the slide. But the result is the same. So, like Redux is more verbose than having all in one place. But that approach can scale. And we are doing it in a very big product and is scaling very well. Also because our wrapped component, the decorated one we call it, expose theme param props that accept an object with 3 possible values: preset, theme name, and overrides. Presets allow us to say, remember before I told you that I need a dialog with a totally different style. Preset over the decorated component, do that. So I decorate with the theme, the dialog, and I express the desire to use the dark preset for the windows. Automatically, all the component themed nested as descendant of the window, of the dialog, will use the dark preset by default until someone, but we can also do that, will change again the preset or restore the original one. And we can also switch completely theme. So if we have more than one theme loaded, we can switch between theme on the fly, and we can do manual overrides. Sometimes we need, only for that particular button, a different single CSS rule. But we don't want to create a new preset for that single. And we can do that using overrides. Overrides is like preset. You define the same structure of your categories, declaring only what you want to override. So this is a third overriding layer we put upon our theme. And we just specify theme parents prop as on the component. The last thing about our theme manager approach is that we don't want to be coupled to a single library. Right now we are using a library called Aphrodite, and it's doing its job very well. But we want to switch to different option if something better will comes up. And so our map theme to props function output not the style, but JavaScript object. And then we pass those objects to the active plugin we registered to transpile JavaScript to styles. We could also choose to do not use CSS, but inline style, and do nothing, just pass down the object. We do that in some components. And we can do that on a component base. So we can choose this component will use Aphrodite. This other one inline styles. This other one something else differently. So the only thing that is very difficult to add as how we are doing stuff now are CSS module. But because CSS module expect the style to exist before, not dynamically. So this is mostly the problem. And last thing, we care about performance. We work with maps rendering thousands of markers constantly changing. So we need to be careful on every millisecond we spend on rendering. And so we our plugin for Aphrodite memoize and optimize everything we can optimize to avoid to repeat anything if possible. The product is not perfect. We know of many flaws, and we are working on that. And I hope in next weeks, I hope before end of April to open source it, so to have also contribution. And I really hope in contribution, because this is the effort of few minds. Having hundreds of minds really improve stuff. And last but not least, we are hiring front-end developer. So if you live around Verona or New Jersey and want to work in a multi-language and multi-country company, just write me and we will get in touch. Thank you.